They keep trying to figure you out, watching how you move, analyzing your tone, studying your silences like they contain some kind of key. But no matter how close they look, they miss it, because you were never meant to be read. You weren't built for their logic. You don't give them what they need, a pattern, a script, a tell. You don't repeat, you don't mirror, you don't give off signals that help them feel in control. And when someone can't categorize you, they stall, they guess, and in the seconds they hesitate, you move. You don't move faster, you just move first. Not because you're impulsive, but because you already understood what they're still trying to read. That's the difference. They think you're hiding something, but you're not hiding. You're just unexposed. You don't decorate your thoughts for comfort. You don't wrap your intent in soft language. You simply don't perform. And that's what scrambles them. They want to know what you want, what you feel, what you mean. But the truth is, you already passed that point. You made the decision before the conversation started. You didn't wait for the signal. You were the signal, and they missed it. They think you're hard to follow, but you're not. They're just always 2 steps late, because they're still trying to translate what you never needed to explain. They keep mistaking your silence for hesitation, keep thinking your calm means you're unsure, but you were never in the same conversation. While they're still decoding your last move, you've already planned the next 3. You're not unpredictable, you're just uninterested in playing the role they expect. Because they rely on patterns, they depend on rhythm, reactions, tells, repetitions. They don't think, they read. And when someone doesn't read the way they're used to, they stall, they overthink, they panic, and that's when they lose their grip. You don't speed up, you slow the room down, you don't dominate with presence, you remove the need to prove anything. And that absence of need, it unbalances them. Because if you're not seeking power, attention, or approval, what are you doing? You're observing, not passively, not with curiosity, with intent, precision, calculation. While they posture, you position. While they perform, you plan. And by the time they sense the shift, you've already moved without noise, left no trail, just results. They call it manipulation, they call it luck, but deep down, they know you don't wait for cues. You write your own script and exit the scene before they even learn the first line. You're not ahead because you're faster. You're ahead because you don't waste time being readable. They react to you like you're a glitch in the room, a quiet error they can't trace. They can't find the reason why they feel off around you. They just do. And it's not because of what you say. It's because of what you don't say, what you leave hanging, what you allow them to assume, knowing they'll get it wrong. They talk to fill space. You let the space talk first. They tell stories. You listen to what's missing. They ask questions. You notice what they don't ask. They try to connect. You wait to see what parts they edit to be likable. And the longer the silence stretches, the more they realize You're not looking to be known. You're watching to see what reveals itself when they think you're not watching. You don't explain, you don't decode yourself, and they hate that because people don't fear mystery, they fear irrelevance, and that's what you bring, not confusion, not danger, just proof that they were never in control of the narrative, that the room can still shift without their input, that someone can enter quietly, say almost nothing, and still end up holding the tempo. You're ahead because you're not asking to be understood. You're asking nothing, and that silence reads louder than any performance. They try to map you, strategize around you, predict your next move based on your last. But every time they think they've got it, you're already somewhere else. Not because you're hiding, but because you never needed to stay still to be seen. You move when it matters, stay quiet when it doesn't. And that timing alone turns the whole room nervous. You don't follow patterns. You leave silence where others would explain. You pause where others would perform. You shift when the noise gets loud, and that makes people chase ghosts. Because when someone like you doesn't play the game, the board itself feels wrong. They start guessing your motives, overanalyzing your expressions, reading into every pause like it holds some secret message. But there is no secret. There's just you, unbothered, unread, and already moving before the question finishes forming. You're not ahead because you studied harder. You're ahead because you were never waiting for permission to move. That unsettles them more than any threat ever could. Because in a world where everything's about being seen, being readable, being understood, you're the one reminder that not every presence wants to be deciphered. Some just exist, and their existence alone breaks the rhythm. They call it unpredictable, they call it suspicious, but what they really mean is you don't give them enough to control, and that means they'll always be catching up to someone who was never running. They keep trying to pull you into a narrative, push you into a corner where you have to clarify, explain, react, but you don't. You stay centered, you stay still, and that stillness rewrites the entire room. Because people expect movement, they expect response, and when they don't get it, they fill the silence with fear. They start drawing conclusions you never gave them permission to build, but you let them. You let them guess, you let them talk, and you never interrupt the story they create because you already know how it ends. You don't need to correct them. You don't need to defend yourself. You don't even need them to get it right, because while they're still defining you, you're already acting on information they didn't notice. You're not ahead because you're mysterious. You're ahead because you're informed, quietly, and when you move, it's clean, unannounced, irreversible. They never see it coming. They only feel the shift after it's already done. They think you're unpredictable because you don't show your hand. But the truth is, you're not playing their game. You're building a board they don't even know they're standing on. And when it moves, they blame you, not because you broke the rules, but because you were never following theirs to begin with. If you're still here, you're already ahead. Subscribe and let them guess. You don't have to be in the room anymore. Your absence says enough. They measure new people against you now. Not openly, but it's there, in the way they watch others for your stillness, in the way they listen for your kind of silence. But they never find it, because what you carried wasn't strategy, it was structure, internal, untouchable. You never trained to be unreadable, you just refused to be anything else. Now they react to shadows of you. A pause reminds them, a look triggers something, and without realizing it, they're adjusting, filtering, holding back. Not for anyone in the room, but for the echo of someone who no longer speaks. You became the control variable, the ghost in the system, the silent standard they don't mention but can't shake. Because once someone like you exists, the illusion of predictability dies. They know now, silence can hold command, stillness can shift outcomes, presence doesn't have to perform, and that realization, it doesn't fade, it stains. You didn't intend to lead, you didn't fight to be first. But the moment you stopped responding, they started reacting to every version of you they could imagine. Not because you were loud, but because you were precise. And precision terrifies people who rely on noise. Now they talk like your type is rare. But what they mean is, you made everything after feel lesser. You didn't compete, you redefined what was worth chasing, and now they chase it in rooms you never walked into. You don't dominate by presence, you shift the architecture by not needing to be seen. Nothing feels authentic anymore, not because the world changed, but because you revealed what was always off. After someone like you exits, the noise feels louder, the performances more desperate, the charm less convincing. It's not that you exposed people, you exposed the game itself, the need to be understood, the addiction to being legible, the obsession with fitting inside someone else's idea of power. You didn't reject it, you just ignored it, and that indifference rewrote the value of attention in every room you left. Now they try to recreate your silence, try to mimic your detachment. But imitation always misses the origin, because your stillness wasn't empty, it wasn't blank, it was full of direction, unsaid, undisturbed, focused. And that's the part they can't copy. They perform silence like it's a tactic. You embodied it like it was instinct. And in doing so, you stripped their control from them without ever touching a single thread. They used to own the rhythm. Now they wait for a beat that doesn't come. You didn't become invisible. You just stopped letting them predict your outline. And in that blank space, they lost their compass. You are not hard to understand. You are just hard to reduce. And now everything else feels shallow by contrast. Not because you said more, but because you needed to say nothing to make everything shift. You're not mentioned anymore, not by name, not directly, but the way they talk around certain topics, the way they pause before saying too much, the way they glance at each other when silence stretches, tells the whole story. You left the room, but not the structure. They're still moving around you like you're a gravitational pull they can't shake. You were never the loudest, never the center, but you became the reference, the unspoken benchmark for composure, unpredictability, and presence. Not because you tried to lead, but because you didn't follow. Now everything feels too visible, too eager, too exposed, because once someone like you exists, the system has to admit that clarity doesn't come from noise. It comes from the person who can sit still and never have to explain why. They used to talk over people like you. Now they hesitate, not out of respect, out of caution, because you taught them what power without effort looks like. And now they're all pretending not to want it, while chasing every room you no longer enter. They want the effect without the origin, the outcome without the integrity. But what you had wasn't for sale, and now they're stuck imitating something they can't even define, because you didn't move like a threat. You moved like a fact, undeniable, cold, already written. And once something's written that clearly, everything else looks like noise trying to matter. You stopped thinking in terms of moves, stopped thinking in terms of winning, because none of it was about the game anymore. It was about space, silence, precision. You weren't trying to outpace them. You were just operating in a different dimension where their noise couldn't follow. They're still calculating, still strategizing, still playing for approval, for advantage, for recognition. But you detached from that orbit a long time ago, quietly, without announcement, without drama. You didn't need to say you were done. You just moved differently, and they felt it. They still do. Because they keep trying to engage, trying to draw a reaction. But every time they reach for a version of you they understood, they hit nothing, a void. Not because you vanished, but because you stopped mirroring. You stopped giving them angles. You became clean, flat, undecodable. And that terrified them more than confrontation ever could. They used to think clarity was about saying more, but you showed them it's about needing less, fewer words, fewer responses, less performance. And that kind of economy is power, not loud, not visible, but final. You didn't rush ahead to win, you stepped sideways and disappeared from the board. Now they're stuck trying to catch up to someone who's not even in the same game. And no matter how fast they move, they're only chasing the version of themselves that still believes you were ever meant to be readable. You never needed to be understood. That was never the goal, and now they know it. They stop trying to figure you out, not because they finally did, but because they finally couldn't. You didn't change pace, you changed direction. You didn't break the pattern, you stopped playing within it. And the moment you did, everything they built around knowing people started to fracture, because all their tools, observation, imitation, manipulation, failed. None of it worked on someone who didn't need to be seen to exist, who didn't need attention to hold presence, who didn't need to speak to be felt. You weren't ahead because you were faster. You were ahead because you were finished. You had already processed the room before they even entered. You'd already made your choice while they were still deciding who to impress. And while they still move for applause, you move in silence. No agenda, no performance. Just clarity without commentary. Now, when your name comes up, the tone changes. Not because of what you did, but because of what they couldn't make you become. You didn't resist them. You removed the need for them. And that kind of exit, it doesn't echo, it erases.